Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Tonight, the bubble and the bot. President Trump held his first cabinet meeting today where White House special advisor and world's wealthiest man, Elon Musk, stood over the assembled cabinet secretaries and told them that a fair number of their employees are either dead or don't exist. Musk provided no evidence of this, but the president allowed that it might be true. Essentially, that the federal workforce might well be riddled with bots, things that look real but are not. Musk, of course, would know something about bots. When he took over Twitter, he vowed to remove them from the platform. Bots, of course, are fake accounts run by computers or artificial intelligence. They amplify content, often spreading misinformation or hate speech. As election year 2024 progressed, the bot problem on Twitter, renamed X, did not go away. In fact, research from Clemson University and the University of Southern California suggests the bot syndrome got worse, not better. The bubble, that is a reference to Mr. Trump saying any federal employee who did not respond to Musk's now somewhat famous "what did you do last week" email were, quote, on the bubble, meaning they could be fired over this episode alone. The president said this even as some of the cabinet secretaries listening to him had informed their employees they were not compelled to respond to Musk. Last week, Musk, again without verifiable evidence, said bots in the form of dead people were collecting Social Security benefits. Musk has failed to prove there is a bot problem with Social Security or, for that matter, the federal workforce. But there was a bot problem at Twitter, and there still is at X. And Musk seems pretty okay with that. Of course, much more came from this cabinet meeting, and we begin there with Olivia Rinaldi at the White House and Caitlin Huey-Burns on Capitol Hill. Olivia, it's great to see you. President Trump is many things. Among the things he is routinely is he is a atmosphere or scene setter, and he did so with Elon Musk at the cabinet meeting. Let's all listen to how he set the stage.
Are you anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, we'll throw him out of here. Is anybody unhappy? They have a lot of respect for Elon and that he's doing this, and some disagree a little bit, but I will tell you, for the most part, I think everyone's not only happy, they're thrilled.
A round of applause, Olivia.
Yeah, certainly, Major. What an incredible scene there, seeing Elon Musk, the world's richest man, holding court at Trump's first cabinet meeting, assembling the entirety of his cabinet for his second administration. And yet a significant amount of that time was dedicated to Elon Musk talking to the press, at least ahead of that meeting. Trump addressing what Musk is doing ahead of that, also joking with his cabinet that if they disagreed with what Musk is doing, he would throw them out of there. That was a comment that was also met with applause. Trump also said that for the most part, people within his cabinet are happy with what Musk is doing. But he did contend that on that OPM email, the Office of Personnel Management email that you mentioned, that's the infamous 5 things that you did last week email, that some of his cabinet secretaries did not like that email and told their people not to reply to it. He said he understood that reason, but it does create an interesting atmosphere for sure when you do see someone like Elon Musk essentially talking about all the things that they are doing ahead of this cabinet meeting. On those government cuts from DOJ, Trump also said that his administration has to cut down the size of government. He called the size of government bloated, sloppy. He suggested that there are people that aren't doing their job, but people that also just don't exist and are being paid a government salary. Now, we've asked the White House to clarify exactly what that means and who is duplicating jobs or perhaps dead and doing those jobs. We will update you when we have that answer. But I also want to make one last point, and that's Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary, was just here on the White House front lawn where he was talking with some reporters, and he was asked about Elon Musk specifically in that meeting and his role in government. He likened him to an auditor or a contractor, saying that essentially what he's doing is making suggestions, but it's ultimately going to be up to those cabinet secretaries. And one last point that he made to us, he said one misunderstanding I should correct. The press were in there at the start of the meeting, and and it was essentially a press conference. But once the press left, the dialogue among cabinet members back and forth around all of these ideas actually started, meaning that some of these cabinet secretaries, although they're putting on a good face, perhaps they're still having those dialogues behind those closed doors without the press in the room. Major.
The definition of dialogue to be continued. And Caitlin, we look forward to any updates you can provide tonight or tomorrow night or some frequent night from the White House about those fictitious or dead federal employees. Caitlin, I want to talk to you about last night's very big victory for House Republicans and, by extension, House Speaker Mike Johnson. It was a close vote. It was unclear hours before whether they had the votes. They got them. The budget resolution passed. The process continues. But as we understand it, Elon Musk met with the Speaker after passage of the budget resolution last night. To what effect are DOGE efforts shaping or influencing this process?
Yeah, we've seen that President Trump and Elon Musk have become kind of the de facto whips of this Republican conference. I mean, House Speaker Mike Johnson is the speaker, but a lot of these members are taking their cues from Donald Trump and Elon Musk. In fact, Donald Trump was on the phone with lawmakers up until the very last minute last night and yesterday, trying to get them to support this bill. The House Speaker has said that these cuts that DOGE is seeking or, wanting to make, they want to incorporate all of that into this reconciliation process, this effort on their part to cut government spending. Now, House Republicans, in that framework they passed last night, called for $2 trillion in spending cuts. And so they're going to incorporate what they are seeing from DOGE. But, Major, it's really fascinating up here on Capitol Hill because we've seen over the past several weeks, there's been this question of where is Congress? While the White House is making all of these executive actions, while Elon Musk is making, essentially direct cuts to these agencies, where is Congress exerting its autonomy here? They're trying to do it through this budget process, but we also heard from the Speaker yesterday that they are kind of happy about what Musk is doing because, in their view, he's able to unlock things that they haven't been able to kind of get inside agencies the way that he says Congress hasn't been able to. So all of that is coming as you have some Republicans up here hearing from their constituents also concerned about some of these cuts in their own districts, even conservative Republican districts. And there is a concern among some lawmakers that the way in which Musk and the president are going about these cuts isn't really, is kind of too big, too broad, and they want to scale it down or at least be more precise about it. So you're seeing that kind of clash, that tension up here on Capitol Hill, at least as it comes to these cuts.
And Caitlin, you mentioned some of the blowback or conversation that members of Congress are getting from their constituents. We're going to have more on that a little bit later in the show during our reporter panel. Olivia, I want to ask you about this memo that came out that asks for agency heads for reorganization plans and leaves open the very real prospect of even deeper cuts to the federal workforce. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Major, this amounts to a massive reordering of what the federal government actually looks like. Our Kristen Brown obtained this memo from the Office of Personnel Management and essentially went out to all leaders of the executive branch, asking them to submit what they're calling reorganization plans. Those will be due in the next 2 weeks by March 13th. And it asks agencies to seek to consolidate, reading from the memo now, areas of the agency organizations chart that are duplicative, consolidate management layers where unnecessary layers exist, and also to maximally reduce outside use of consultants and contractors. Now, Major, you've been in Washington a long time. There are a lot of consultants and a lot of contractors in this town. This is going to massively change what the federal government looks like and the operations of it. I should note that there are people that are exempt from this. That includes law enforcement, border security, national security, immigration enforcement, public safety responsibilities. Think about those air traffic controllers that are federal workers and military personnel. But ultimately, this memo is asking really for a consolidation and a scaling down of federal government, something to watch for over the next couple of weeks as we start to see from these agencies exactly who is being cut and in what jobs. We know already today from Lee Zeldin in that cabinet secretary meeting where he said about 65% of the EPA is going to be cut. That's one agency that's certainly on the chopping block and going to be scaled down significantly.
Olivia, thank you very much. Caitlin, very quickly to you, because this came up last night. Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, Republican, who was leaning no, voted for the budget resolution after talking to the president, and the president assuring her that they would, quote, in this process, save health care and make it better. Any idea what he meant by that?
Well, a lot of the conversation around this budget has centered around what to do with Medicaid. I mentioned they're looking for $2 trillion to cut from government spending. This bill asked the Energy Committee, the Commerce Committee, to look at least how to cut $800 billion in spending. This committee oversees Medicaid, Medicare, and other programs. So while the bill doesn't outline or doesn't say exactly you need to cut Medicaid, there is a directive to cut spending, and this committee oversees those health care programs. You heard from some moderate members who represent Medicare districts or districts that rely on Medicaid, and expressing concern about this. This will remain a sticking point moving forward, because remember, what happened last night is really just bullet points, an outline, a blueprint. Now they have to go through and actually fill this out with policy. Not to mention, they have to sync up with the Senate on that blueprint altogether. So we're still a long way away from seeing any policy reforms here. And that essentially underscores the idea that, the executive branch is trying to go at this alone in a lot of ways. Congress still has to fund these programs.
Caitlin Huey-Burns on Capitol Hill, Olivia Rinaldi, North Lawn of the White House. Thanks so very much.